Professor David Chen checked his watch for the third time in 5 minutes. He was running late and not for something important. No, this was one of those obligations he couldn't avoid. The university had made it clear that all faculty members receiving research grants had to participate in community outreach programs. It was all part of their public engagement initiative, they said. A way to give back to the community, they said. David didn't see it that way. He had 3 research papers to review, a conference presentation to prepare, and a doctoral student waiting for feedback on her dissertation. Instead, he was driving across town to some community center to talk about mathematics to people who probably hadn't touched an equation since high school. He pulled into the parking lot of the Riverside Community Center 20 minutes late. The building was old, with faded paint and a cracked sign out front. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the smell of old coffee lingered in the air. A young volunteer directed him to a small meeting room at the end of the hallway. When David walked in, his heart sank a little more. Only 7 people sat scattered across the 30 folding chairs arranged in neat rows. Most of them looked like they had wandered in to escape the cold outside. An elderly man dozed in the corner. 2 teenagers sat in the back, probably waiting for some other program to start. A middle-aged woman in a business suit typed furiously on her phone, barely looking up. And then there was the woman in the 3rd row. She wore a simple gray sweater and worn jeans. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she had a notebook open on her lap. Unlike everyone else, she was actually looking at him, waiting for him to begin. David set down his bag and forced a smile. This was going to be a long hour. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice carrying the practiced enthusiasm of someone who had given this talk too many times. "I'm Professor Chen from Westbridge University, and today we're going to explore the fascinating world of mathematical thinking." The elderly man snored softly. The teenagers whispered to each other. Only the woman in gray seemed to be listening. Her pen poised over her notebook. David clicked through his slides, talking about patterns in nature, the beauty of numbers, and how mathematics shaped everything around us. He had dumbed down his usual material considerably. No complex theorems, no advanced concepts, just basic ideas that anyone could understand. Or so he thought. About 15 minutes in, he noticed the woman in gray was writing rapidly in her notebook. She wasn't just taking notes. She was working through something, her brow furrowed in concentration. When he mentioned the Fibonacci sequence, her pen moved even faster. David felt a familiar irritation rising. She was probably confused, trying to keep up and getting herself tangled in misunderstandings. He'd seen it before with people who thought they understood mathematics but really didn't. They'd grab onto a concept and run with it in completely wrong directions. He decided to address it head-on. It would be a good teaching moment, he told himself. A way to gently show the difference between casual interest and real mathematical understanding. "Let's try something interactive," David said, walking to the whiteboard at the front of the room. The teenagers looked up, suddenly worried they might be called on. "I'm going to put up a problem, and I'd like someone to come up and work through it with me." He wrote out an equation. It wasn't too difficult, just a calculus problem that required understanding derivatives and limits. The kind of thing his undergraduate students handled easily, but probably far beyond what this audience had encountered before. No one volunteered. The room fell silent except for the buzzing lights and the elderly man's gentle snoring. David's eyes settled on the woman in gray. She had stopped writing and was staring at the equation on the board. There was something in her expression he couldn't quite read. "How about you?" he said, gesturing to her with what he hoped was an encouraging smile. "Would you like to give it a try?" The woman looked startled, her eyes widening. "Oh, I don't think I should." "It's perfectly fine," David said, his tone dripping with the kind of gentle condescension he used with struggling students. "This is a learning environment. There's no wrong answers here. We'll work through it together." The other attendees watched with obvious relief that they hadn't been chosen. The woman in gray hesitated, clutching her notebook. For a moment, David thought she might refuse, which would be awkward. But then she slowly stood up and walked to the front of the room. Up close, he could see she was older than he'd first thought, probably in her early 40s. Her hands were rough, the kind that came from physical work. She took the piece of chalk he offered with obvious reluctance. "Just start wherever you feel comfortable," David said, stepping back and crossing his arms. He was already planning how he'd guide her through the problem. how he'd use her struggle to illustrate the importance of mathematical education. The woman stood in front of the board for a long moment, studying the equation. The silence stretched out. David was about to offer a hint when she reached up and began to write. Her first few steps were standard, exactly what he expected. She was identifying the components of the equation, setting up the solution. David nodded to himself. Maybe she had taken some college math years ago. She'd probably get stuck soon and then he could step in. But she didn't get stuck. Her chalk moved steadily across the board, line after line. Her handwriting was neat and precise, each number and symbol carefully formed. David found himself leaning forward, watching more closely. At the fourth line, she paused. David opened his mouth to help, but then she made a move he didn't expect. Instead of following the standard method he would have taught, she took a different approach. She was using a substitution he hadn't considered, one that seemed to come out of nowhere. He frowned, trying to follow her logic. Was she making a mistake? But no, as she continued, he began to see what she was doing. It was clever, actually, more than clever. She was simplifying the problem in a way that would make the final steps much easier. The room had gone completely quiet. Even the teenagers were watching now, sensing something unusual was happening. The woman worked through the problem with steady confidence, her alternative method unfolding with elegant efficiency. When she reached the final answer, she set down the chalk and stepped back, looking at David with an uncertain expression. He stared at the board, his mind racing. The solution was correct. More than correct, it was brilliant. She had solved a graduate-level problem using a technique that showed deep, intuitive understanding of mathematical theory. This wasn't something you learned from a textbook. This was the kind of thinking that came from years of working with advanced mathematics. Where did you learn that method? David asked, his voice coming out sharper than he intended. The woman looked down at her hands. I'm sorry, is it wrong? I just thought it might work. Wrong? David blinked. No, it's not wrong at all. It's actually quite sophisticated. Where did you study mathematics? She shifted uncomfortably, aware that everyone in the room was now staring at her. I didn't really. I mean, not recently. I figured it made sense that way. David felt his assumptions crumbling. This woman, who he had dismissed at first glance, who he had patronized and underestimated, had just demonstrated mathematical ability that would impress his doctoral students. You just figured it out? He repeated. She nodded, looking like she wanted to disappear. Can I sit down now? Of course, David said, still too stunned to say much else. The woman hurried back to her seat, gathering her notebook and seeming to shrink into herself. The seminar continued, but David could barely focus on his own words. His eyes kept drifting to the woman in the third row, to her worn notebook, to the way she was now sitting very still, as if trying to be invisible. Who was she? And what was someone with that level of mathematical talent doing at a community center seminar for beginners? When the hour finally ended, David barely noticed the others filing out. He was packing up his laptop when he realized the woman was heading for the door. He had to talk to her. He had to know more. David caught up with her just outside the community center. The evening air was cool, and the parking lot was nearly empty under the dim streetlights. Excuse me, he called out. Wait, please. The woman stopped and turned around slowly. In the outdoor light, she looked even more tired than before, like someone who had already put in a full day's work before coming to this seminar. I wanted to apologize, David said, approaching her carefully. He felt genuinely embarrassed now, thinking about his condescending tone earlier. I shouldn't have put you on the spot like that. It was presumptuous of me. She shook her head. It's okay. You were just trying to make the class interactive. Maybe, David admitted, but I made assumptions I shouldn't have. That solution you found was remarkable, really remarkable. I need to know, where did you learn to think about mathematics that way? The woman clutched her notebook tighter, like she was holding on to something precious. I should probably get going. I have to be up early tomorrow. Please, David said, just a few minutes. There's a coffee shop right across the street. Let me buy you a cup of coffee. I promise I'll keep it brief. She hesitated, looking uncertain. Then something in her expression softened, maybe curiosity about why this professor was so interested. Okay, just for a few minutes. They walked across the street to a small diner that looked like it had been there since the 1970s. The vinyl booths were cracked and the coffee was served in thick ceramic mugs that had seen better days. They sat across from each other in a corner booth, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. "I'm David, by the way," he said, extending his hand. "Rachel," she replied, shaking it briefly. Her grip was strong. "So, Rachel," David began, wrapping his hands around his coffee mug. "I've been teaching mathematics for 15 years. I've worked with some brilliant students, people who went on to do amazing research. What you did tonight reminded me of them. That's not something you just pick up casually." Rachel stared into her coffee. It was a long time ago. What was? She was quiet for so long that David thought she might not answer. Then slowly she started talking. "I went to college when I was 18, she said. Full scholarship to Patterson University, mathematics major. I loved it. Everything just made sense to me in a way it didn't for most other people. Numbers, patterns, equations, they all spoke to me like a language I'd always known." David listened, not interrupting. He could hear the pain in her voice, the weight of old memories. "My professors noticed. They said I had a gift, that I could go far. By my sophomore year, I was taking graduate-level courses. They were talking about PhD programs, research opportunities, all these possibilities." Rachel's voice grew softer. "And then my mom got sick." She paused, taking a sip of her coffee. Her hands trembled slightly. "It was cancer. Aggressive. The doctor said she had maybe a year, probably less. She was a single mom, and I was her only child. There was no one else to take care of her." Rachel met David's eyes. "So I left school. Withdrew in my junior year. I got a night job at an office building cleaning, so I could be with her during the day. The pay wasn't great, but it covered her medical bills and kept us afloat." "I'm sorry," David said quietly. Rachel shrugged, but he could see the old grief still there. "She lasted 3 years, longer than the doctors predicted. I was grateful for that time, I really was. But when she passed, I was 25 years, old with no degree, no savings, and no idea how to go back to the life I'd left behind." "You didn't try to return to school?" "How could I?" Rachel's laugh was bitter. "My scholarship was gone, I couldn't afford tuition, and honestly I was ashamed. I'd been this promising student and I'd just disappeared. My professors probably forgot about me. Everyone had moved on. I couldn't face going back and admitting I'd failed." "You didn't fail," David said firmly. "You made a sacrifice for someone you loved." "Maybe," Rachel said. "But it didn't feel that way. I felt like I'd thrown away the one thing I was good at. So I just kept working. Cleaning offices at night became my life. Eventually, I got a job at Westbridge University. Better pay, better benefits. I've been there for 15 years now." David's eyes widened. "You work at Westbridge?" Rachel nodded. "Third shift custodial staff. I clean the mathematics building, actually. Anderson Hall." The irony hit David like a physical blow. "You've been working in my building? All this time?" "Probably," Rachel said. "I don't usually run into the professors. I come in after midnight when everyone's gone. But I see your offices, your classrooms. I see the equations on the whiteboards that nobody bothered to erase. Sometimes I see the problems graduate students are working on, written out on scratch paper left behind." "And you solve them," David said, understanding dawning. Rachel looked embarrassed. "Sometimes, in my head or in my notebook, I can't help it. When I see a mathematical problem, my brain just starts working on it automatically. It's like seeing a puzzle I have to solve even though nobody asked me to." David leaned back in the booth trying to process this. One of the most naturally talented mathematical minds he'd ever encountered had been cleaning his office for years, invisible to him and everyone else in the department. "Rachel, you need to come back," he said. "Finish your degree. You're too talented to be wasted on cleaning floors." Her expression hardened. "I'm not wasted. I have a job. I pay my bills. I have a life." "But is it the life you want?" "It's the life I have," Rachel said firmly. "And I'm 42 years old. I'm not some young student with big dreams anymore. That ship has sailed. Mathematics doesn't have an age limit, David argued. Some of the greatest breakthroughs have come from people older than you. You have something special, Rachel. Real. Insight that most people will never have, no matter how much education they get. Rachel stood up, pulling on her jacket. Thank you for the coffee, Professor, and thank you for the kind words, but I know my place. I've made peace with it. Tonight was just a weird coincidence, that's all. It doesn't have to be, David said, standing as well. Let me help you. I can talk to the department, arrange for you to audit some classes, maybe help you figure out financial aid options. Please don't, Rachel said, and there was real fear in her voice now. I don't want anyone knowing about this, about my past or about tonight. I'm just the cleaning lady at Westbridge, that's all anyone needs to know. But why? Because hope is dangerous, Rachel said quietly. I learned that lesson already. I built a life where I don't hope for things I can't have anymore. It's safer that way. She walked out of the diner, leaving David sitting alone with 2 cups of cooling coffee and a head full of thoughts he couldn't quiet. Over the next few days, David couldn't stop thinking about Rachel. He found himself staying late at his office past midnight, hoping to run into her. He wanted to talk to her again, to convince her that it wasn't too late, that she deserved another chance. He finally saw her on Thursday night. He was working at his desk around 1 in the morning when he heard the soft sound of a cleaning cart in the hallway. He stepped out and saw Rachel pushing her cart toward his office, a surprised look on her face when she spotted him. Professor Chen, she said formally. I didn't expect anyone to be here. I was hoping to see you, David admitted. I wanted to talk more about what we discussed. There's nothing more to discuss, Rachel said, but her voice lacked conviction. Then just humor me, David said. Come look at this. He led her into his office and pointed to his whiteboard. On it was written a complex problem that had been bothering him for weeks. His graduate students had been struggling with it, and he hadn't found an elegant solution either. This is what my research team is working on, David explained. We're stuck. None of us can find a way through that doesn't involve pages of tedious calculations. Rachel stared at the board. David watched as her eyes moved across the equation, that same intense focus he'd seen at the community center. I shouldn't, she said, but her hand was already reaching for a marker. Just look at it, David said softly. That's all, no pressure. Rachel picked up the marker. For a moment she just held it, suspended between the person she was and the person she used to be. Then, almost against her will, she started writing. David watched as she worked through the problem. Her approach was completely different from anything his team had tried. She made connections between concepts that seemed unrelated, found patterns where they'd seen only chaos. Within 20 minutes, she'd outlined a solution that was both elegant and powerful. When she finished, she set down the marker and stepped back, looking almost frightened by what she'd just done. That's incredible, David breathed. Rachel, this is exactly what we needed. You've just saved us weeks of work. I should go, Rachel said, backing toward the door. I have floors to clean. Wait, David said. He pulled out his phone and took a picture of the whiteboard. Can I share this with my research team? I won't tell them who solved it. Just that I got help from a consultant. Rachel hesitated, then nodded. I guess that's okay. After she left, David stared at the solution on his board. Then he made a decision. He was going to find a way to bring Rachel back to mathematics, whether she thought she was ready or not. Because talent like hers was too rare to let slip away into the night. Pushing a cleaning cart through empty hallways, he just had to figure out how to convince her that second chances were real, even when you'd stopped believing in them. David shared the solution with his research team the next morning. He gathered them in the conference room, 6 graduate students, who had been beating their heads against this problem for 2 weeks straight. I want you to look at this approach, David said, displaying the photo of Rachel's work on the screen. His lead student, a sharp woman named Jennifer, leaned forward immediately. Wait, where did this come from? This isn't the direction we were going at all. Does it work? David asked. The team spent the next hour verifying the solution, following Rachel's logic through each step. The room grew quieter as they realized what they were looking at. This wasn't just a correct answer. It was a breakthrough that opened up entirely new possibilities for their research. "This is brilliant," Jennifer said finally. "Whoever did this has an incredible grasp of advanced topology." "Professor Chen, did you bring in someone from another university?" "Something like that," David said vaguely. "The important thing is we can move forward now." But Jennifer wasn't letting it go. "Can we consult with them again? Because this approach suggests some applications we haven't even considered. I'd love to talk to whoever this is about extending the methodology." David felt torn. He'd promised Rachel anonymity, but his team needed more help. And more than that, he was becoming convinced that this was the path to drawing Rachel back into mathematics. If she could see that her work mattered, that people valued her insights, maybe she'd reconsider. Over the next week, David developed a plan. He started leaving problems on his office whiteboard before he left each evening. Complex, unsolved problems that genuinely puzzled him. Then he'd come in early the next morning to see if Rachel had left any work behind. She tried to resist. The first few nights, the board remained untouched except for being cleaned. But David was patient. He kept leaving new problems, each one carefully chosen to be interesting enough to catch her attention. On the fourth night, he found something. Rachel hadn't written on his board, but there was a page from her notebook left on his desk, covered in equations and notes. She'd worked through the entire problem, showing him not just one solution but 3 different approaches, comparing their strengths and weaknesses. David felt like he'd won a small victory. He left her a note. "Thank you. This helps more than you know. You have a gift for seeing connections others miss." The next morning, the note was gone, but there was no response. Still, Rachel kept leaving solutions. It became their silent conversation, conducted through mathematics in the quiet hours of the night. David's research team started noticing the progress. Problems that had seemed impossible were suddenly yielding to clever new approaches. Jennifer cornered him one afternoon in his office. "Professor, level with me," she said. "Who is this mystery consultant? Because they're working at a level beyond most of our faculty. I've been asking around and nobody knows who you're collaborating with." "It's complicated," David said. "Is it someone who doesn't want to be credited? Because if they keep helping us at this rate, they deserve authorship on our papers." That night, David stayed late again, waiting. Around 1:30 in the morning, Rachel arrived with her cart. She saw the light under his door and hesitated, clearly thinking about skipping his office tonight. "Please come in," David called out. "I need to talk to you." Rachel sighed and pushed her cart into his office. "I thought we had an understanding. I solve your problems, you don't make it weird." "My team wants to know who you are," David said. "Your work is too good. They want to collaborate directly. Maybe even include you as a co-author on upcoming papers." Rachel's face went pale. "No, absolutely not." "Professor Chen, I told you I don't want anyone knowing about this." "Why not? Rachel, you're producing work that's genuinely advancing our research. You deserve recognition." "I'm the cleaning lady," Rachel said, her voice rising slightly. "Do you know what would happen if people found out? They'd either think it was a joke or they'd feel sorry for me. Or worse, they'd be angry that I was pretending to be something I'm not." "You're not pretending. You are a mathematician." "I'm someone who cleans toilets for a living," Rachel said bluntly. "That's the reality. Everything else is just a fantasy I play with in my notebook when nobody's watching." David stood up and moved to his whiteboard. "Okay, let me show you something." He pulled up his email on his computer and projected it on the screen. "This is from Professor Williams at Stanford. She's one of the leading researchers in our field. I sent her your solution to the topology problem anonymously, just the work with no name attached." "Read what she said." Rachel reluctantly looked at the screen. Professor Williams had written, "This is exceptional work. The insight demonstrated here is remarkable. I'd very much like to know who developed this approach. If they're looking for postdoctoral positions, I'd be honored to have them in my lab." "You see," David said. "She doesn't know who you are, what you look like, where you work. She only knows the quality of your thinking, and she wants to work with you." Rachel stared at the email for a long moment. "That's nice," she said finally. "But it doesn't change anything. I can't just suddenly become a mathematician again. I'm too old, too far behind. I'd have to finish my undergraduate degree first, then maybe graduate school. That's years of work and I can't afford it. What if I told you there might be a way? David said. What if you could audit some classes first just to see how it feels? No commitment, no pressure. Just sit in on a graduate seminar or two. I can't, Rachel said, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. One class, David pressed. My advanced theory seminar. It meets Tuesday and Thursday evenings at 7. You're not working then. Just come, sit in the back, listen. If you hate it, you never come back. But at least give yourself that chance. Rachel closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. You don't understand what you're asking. For 20 years, I've walked past classrooms where people are learning mathematics. I've heard lectures through open doors. I've seen students working on problems at tables in the hallways. And every single time it hurts. It reminds me of what I lost, what I gave up. Or what you could have again, David said gently. And what happens when I fail? Rachel asked. What happens when everyone realizes I'm not as smart as you think I am? That I'm just someone who got lucky a few times? Rachel, luck doesn't solve graduate-level problems that stump entire research teams. That's skill. That's talent. That's years of keeping your mind sharp even when you had every reason to let it go. Rachel picked up a marker and walked to the whiteboard. She wrote out an equation, something complex and beautiful. You want to know what I do at night, Professor? After I finish cleaning? I go home to my one-bedroom apartment, and I work through problems. Problems I find in textbooks at the library. Problems I see on your whiteboards, problems I make up myself. I've been doing it for 20 years because it's the only thing that makes me feel like myself. She turned to face him. But doing it alone in my apartment is different from doing it in a classroom full of people who actually belong there. Those students earned their place. They have degrees and recommendations and futures. I'm just someone who cleans up after them. Then prove yourself wrong, David challenged. Come to one class, just one. If it's as horrible as you think, at least you'll know for sure. But I think you'll surprise yourself. Rachel was quiet for a long time. Finally, she nodded, so slightly David almost missed it. One class. Tuesday evening. But I sit in the back and I don't participate. Deal, David said, trying not to show how excited he was. Rachel picked up her cleaning supplies and headed for the door. Then she paused and looked back. Professor Chen, why are you doing this? Why do you care so much about some cleaning lady who can solve math problems? David thought about his answer carefully. Because I spent the first 15 years of my career thinking I knew what mathematical talent looked like. It looked like prestigious undergraduate degrees and perfect test scores and recommendation letters from famous professors. And then you showed me I was wrong. You showed me that genius can be anywhere, even pushing a cleaning cart through empty hallways at 2 in the morning. If I walked away from that, if I let you disappear back into the shadows, I'd be failing as a teacher and as a mathematician. Rachel's eyes were definitely wet now. She nodded once and left, the wheels of her cart squeaking softly down the hallway. David stood alone in his office, staring at the equation Rachel had written on the board. It was elegant and complex, a small piece of beauty that existed only because she'd bothered to create it. Nobody had asked her to write it. There was no grade, no publication, no recognition attached to it. She'd done it simply because she loved mathematics. That, David thought, was what made a real mathematician. Not the degrees or the job title or the office with their name on the door. It was the pure love of the work itself, the drive to understand and create and explore, even when nobody was watching and nobody cared. Rachel had that. She'd always had it. And on Tuesday evening, David was going to make sure she had the chance to share it with others, whether she believed she deserved it or not. He pulled out his phone and sent a text to Jennifer. Meeting tomorrow. Need to prepare for a possible new audit student in our Tuesday seminar. Someone with unusual background but exceptional ability. I'll fill you in on details. Then he erased the whiteboard and went home, already planning how he'd introduce Rachel to the class without making her feel exposed or uncomfortable. It would be delicate, but he'd figure it out. Because some things were worth the effort, and helping Rachel find her way back to mathematics was definitely one of them. Tuesday evening arrived too quickly for Rachel. She'd spent the entire week second-guessing her decision, finding dozens of reasons why she shouldn't go. She didn't have the right clothes. She'd be too tired after work. She'd look ridiculous sitting in a classroom at her age. The students would stare at her. The professor would regret inviting her. But at 6:30 that evening, she found herself standing outside Anderson Hall, the mathematics building she'd cleaned for 15 years. She'd been inside it thousands of times, but always in the dark, always alone. Now, with lights blazing from every window and students streaming through the doors, it felt like a completely different place. It felt like somewhere she didn't belong. She almost turned around. Her hand was actually on her car door handle when she heard someone call her name. "Rachel, you came." It was Professor Chen, walking across the parking lot with a warm smile. He was wearing a casual sweater instead of his usual suit, looking more relaxed than she'd seen him before. "I'm not sure I should be here," Rachel said honestly. "Well, I'm very glad you are," David said. "Come on, I'll walk you up. The classroom is on the 3rd floor." They walked together through the main entrance. Rachel had mopped these floors so many times she knew every tile, every scuff mark. But seeing them in daylight, with students laughing and talking around her, felt surreal. "The class is small," David explained as they climbed the stairs. "Only 8 students. They're all working on their dissertations, so they're serious about the material but also friendly. Nobody's going to judge you or put you on the spot." "What did you tell them about me?" Rachel asked nervously. "Just that we have a guest auditing the class who has strong mathematical intuition, but hasn't been in formal education for a while. I asked them to be welcoming." David paused outside the classroom door. "You can sit wherever you're comfortable. Participate as much or as little as you want, okay?" Rachel nodded, her mouth too dry to speak. The classroom was small and comfortable, nothing like the huge lecture hall she remembered from her college days. 8 students sat around a large seminar table, chatting and setting up their laptops. They looked up when Rachel entered, and she saw curiosity in their faces but no hostility. "Everyone, this is Rachel," David said. "She's auditing our seminar this semester. Let's make her feel welcome." A young woman with short dark hair smiled at her. "Hi, I'm Jennifer. You can sit here if you want." She gestured to an empty chair at the table. Rachel had planned to sit in the back corner as far from everyone as possible, but Jennifer's smile seemed genuine, and somehow Rachel found herself sitting at the table, pulling out her worn notebook that looked ancient compared to the students' sleek laptops. The class began, and David launched into a discussion of recent developments in mathematical theory. Rachel tried to just listen, to stay invisible, but within minutes she was completely absorbed. This was material she'd been teaching herself from textbooks and journal articles, but hearing it discussed, debated, and analyzed was completely different. It was alive in a way solitary study could never be. Jennifer presented some work she'd been doing, and the class discussed it. Rachel listened intently, her pen moving across her notebook as she followed the logic and noticed some interesting implications Jennifer hadn't mentioned. "Any thoughts, Rachel?" David asked gently. Rachel froze. Every eye in the room turned to her. She could feel her face heating up. "It's okay if you're still processing," David said. "We're just having a conversation." Rachel looked down at her notes. The implication she'd noticed was significant. It would extend Jennifer's work in an important direction. But should she say anything? These were doctoral students. They were smarter than her, better educated, more deserving of being here. Except the mathematics didn't care about any of that. The pattern she'd seen was real, regardless of who noticed it. "I think," Rachel said quietly, her voice barely audible, "there might be an extension to what you're doing. If you apply the same framework to higher dimensional cases, it suggests a connection to some earlier work by Professor Williams at Stanford." The room went silent. Jennifer leaned forward. "Wait, say that again?" Rachel took a deep breath and repeated her observation, this time with more detail. As she talked, she felt something shifting inside her. The words came easier. The fear receded slightly. This was what she was good at. This was where she belonged, even if she'd been away for 20 years. When she finished, Jennifer was furiously taking notes. "That's really interesting. I hadn't thought about the higher dimensional cases at all. That could open up a whole new avenue for the research." "It's just an idea," Rachel said quickly. "I might be wrong." "No, I think you're onto something," another student chimed in. "If we combine that with the work from last semester." The discussion took off, students building on Rachel's idea, exploring its implications. David sat back with a satisfied smile, letting his students work through it. Rachel found herself drawn into the conversation, her initial terror giving way to excitement. This was what she'd been missing, Not just solving problems alone, but collaborating, sharing ideas, building something together. The class ended too soon. As students packed up their things, several came over to talk to Rachel. "That extension you suggested was really clever," Jennifer said. "I'm definitely going to explore that in my next draft." "Do you mind if I credit you?" Rachel blinked. "Credit me? I don't have any credentials. I'm just auditing." "But you contributed an important idea," Jennifer insisted. "That deserves recognition. What's your last name?" "Mitchell," Rachel said automatically, still stunned that anyone wanted to credit her for anything. After the students left, David walked Rachel back to her car. The evening air was cool and clear, and Rachel felt lighter than she had in years. "So?" David asked. "Was it as terrible as you expected?" Rachel laughed, surprised by the sound. "No, it was actually wonderful. I'd forgotten what it felt like to talk about mathematics with other people who care about it as much as I do." "Those students were impressed with you," David said. "Jennifer's already texting me about your idea. She wants to know if you'll be at the next class." "Will I?" Rachel asked. "I mean, is it okay if I keep coming?" "Rachel, you're welcome in my class anytime. In fact, I was hoping you might consider something more formal." Rachel's good mood faltered. "Professor Chen, just hear me out," David said quickly. "The department chair, Dr. Helen Martinez, is someone I trust completely. She's fair, open-minded, and passionate about helping talented students succeed. I'd like to tell her about your situation. Not to pressure you, but to see what options might be available." "Options for what?" "For finishing your degree. Maybe getting financial aid, maybe finding a teaching assistantship that would help cover costs." "You can't keep cleaning floors when you have this kind of gift, Rachel. It's a waste of your talent and your time." Rachel leaned against her car. "I'm scared," she admitted. "What if I fail? What if I'm not good enough anymore?" "You just held your own in a graduate seminar full of doctoral students," David pointed out. "Your idea tonight was better than most of what my researchers come up with." "You're not going to fail." "But what if I do?" David was quiet for a moment. "Then you'll have tried. You'll know you gave yourself a real chance instead of spending the rest of your life wondering what if." "Isn't that worth the risk?" Rachel thought about the class tonight. The way it felt to discuss mathematics with other people. The rush of excitement when Jennifer understood her idea. The sense of belonging she hadn't felt in 2 decades. "One meeting," she said finally, "with your department chair. Just to hear what she has to say. No commitments," David grinned. "That's all I'm asking." The next week, Rachel found herself in Dr. Martinez's office, a comfortable space filled with books and plants. The department chair was a woman in her late 50s with warm eyes and a direct manner. "Professor Chen has told me your story," Dr. Martinez said, after they'd exchanged greetings. "I want you to know that what happened to you isn't uncommon. Life gets in the way of education for many people. The question is, what do we do about it now?" "I'm not sure there's anything to do," Rachel said. "I appreciate Professor Chen's kindness, but I'm realistic about my situation." "Let me be realistic too," Dr. Martinez said. "We don't have many opportunities for people in your position. But we do have some. Westbridge offers a program for adult learners returning to education. It includes some financial assistance, flexible scheduling, and support services. You'd need to finish your undergraduate degree first, but given your previous coursework and obvious ability, that might take less time than you think." "How would I pay for it?" Rachel asked. "I have bills, rent. I can't quit my job." "The university also needs teaching assistants," Dr. Martinez said, "especially for introductory courses. The pay isn't great, but it's better than custodial work, and it would give you experience for graduate school applications. If you wanted to pursue that route eventually." Rachel felt something dangerous stirring in her chest. Hope. The thing she'd been protecting herself from for 20 years. "Graduate school?" she repeated. "Dr. Martinez, I'm 42 years old. So?" The department chair smiled. "I went back for my PhD at 38. One of our best professors started his academic career at 50. Age is irrelevant if you have the ability and the drive. And based on what Professor Chen has shown me of your work, you have both." They talked for another hour, discussing possibilities, timelines, and practicalities. By the end, Rachel had agreed to apply for the Adult Learner program and to continue auditing David's seminar. It wasn't a commitment to anything major, but it was a step forward. A small one, but real. When Rachel left Dr. Martinez's office, she ran into Jennifer in the hallway. The graduate student was carrying an enormous stack of papers and barely managing to keep them from falling. Rachel, perfect timing. Can you help me with something? They ended up in an empty classroom, papers spread across a table. Jennifer had developed Rachel's idea from the seminar, and she wanted feedback. For the next 2 hours, they worked together. Rachel seeing connections and patterns, Jennifer working out the detailed proofs. You know, Jennifer said as they finally packed up, you're better at this than half our graduate students. You should seriously consider applying to our program once you finish your undergrad. Maybe, Rachel said, but for the first time she let herself believe it might actually be possible. That night, Rachel didn't go to work. She'd turned in her notice 2 days earlier, accepting the teaching assistant position Dr. Martinez had helped arrange. Tomorrow she'd start helping with freshman calculus sections. In a month she'd begin her first semester as an official student in 20 years. Standing outside Anderson Hall in the darkness, Rachel thought about all the nights she'd entered this building as an invisible worker, someone who cleaned up after the real scholars. Now she was becoming one of them, not despite her past, but because of it, because she'd kept her love of mathematics alive through 2 decades of hardship and loss, because she'd never stopped solving problems, even when nobody asked her to. She pulled out her worn notebook, the one she'd carried for years, filled with equations and solutions and ideas no one had ever seen. Soon she'd be sharing those ideas in classrooms and research meetings. Soon her name would be on papers and projects. Soon she'd be Rachel Mitchell, mathematician, not just Rachel the cleaning lady who happened to be good at math. The transformation wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges ahead, moments of doubt, times when she'd question if she'd made the right choice. But as Rachel looked up at the lighted windows of the mathematics building, she knew one thing for certain. She was finally, after 20 years, coming home. 18 months later, Rachel stood in front of a classroom of freshman calculus students explaining derivatives. It still felt surreal sometimes being on this side of the room. She remembered sitting in similar seats when she was 18, full of dreams and certainty about the future. Now at 44, she was finally reclaiming that future, though it looked nothing like what she'd once imagined. Any questions? She asked after working through a complex example. A hand shot up in the back. How do you know which method to use? There seem to be so many different approaches. Rachel smiled. That's actually the beautiful part. Mathematics gives you tools, but intuition tells you which tool to use when. That comes with practice and patience. The more problems you solve, the more you start to recognize patterns. After class, she gathered her materials and headed to her next destination, Dr. Martinez's office. Today was the day she'd find out if her undergraduate transcript would finally, officially, show those 3 letters after her name, BS in mathematics. She'd completed her remaining credits in record time, taking advantage of her previous coursework and her obvious mastery of the material. Some professors had let her test out of courses, others had given her independent study options. It hadn't been easy, juggling classes with her teaching assistant duties, but Rachel had attacked it with the focus of someone who'd waited 20 years for a second chance. Dr. Martinez was waiting with a smile and an official-looking folder. Congratulations, Rachel. You're officially a college graduate. Rachel took the diploma with shaking hands. Bachelor of Science in Mathematics with highest honors. She'd done it. The thing she'd thought was impossible just 18 months ago was now real, official, documented. How does it feel? Dr. Martinez asked. Like I can breathe again, Rachel said honestly. Like a weight I didn't even know I was carrying has finally lifted. Well, get ready for the next weight, Dr. Martinez said with a laugh. Because we need to talk about graduate school. Rachel had been accepted into Westbridge's doctoral program in mathematics. She'd applied almost as a formality, not really believing she'd get in. But her undergraduate work had been exceptional, her recommendations glowing, and the research proposal she'd submitted had impressed the entire admissions committee. More than that, she'd already been contributing to real research. Her collaboration with Jennifer had resulted in a published paper, Rachel's name right there in print. Other faculty members had started consulting her on problems, respecting her insights regardless of her lack of credentials at the time. I still can't believe this is happening, Rachel admitted. Sometimes I wake up thinking I'll find myself back in my old apartment, cleaning cart outside the door, and this will all have been a dream. It's real, Dr. Martinez assured her. And you've earned every bit of it, not just through talent, but through persistence and courage. Do you know how rare it is for someone to rebuild their life like this? Rachel thought about the past 18 months. The late nights studying while other people her age were relaxing. The moments of crushing self-doubt when younger students seemed to grasp concepts faster. The financial stress of living on a teaching assistant's salary. The fear that at any moment someone would realize she didn't actually belong, but she'd pushed through all of it. And now she was here. I wanted to tell you something, Dr. Martinez continued. Professor Chen recommended you for the Goldstein Fellowship. It's a full scholarship for doctoral students who show exceptional promise. It covers tuition, provides a living stipend, and includes funding for research. The committee reviewed your application last week. Rachel's heart hammered. And? You got it. Full funding for 5 years. Rachel had to sit down. The fellowship meant she could focus entirely on her studies and research, without constantly worrying about money. It meant security, stability, and recognition that she truly belonged here. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for taking a chance on me when you had no reason to. We didn't take a chance, Dr. Martinez corrected. We recognized talent when we saw it. There's a difference. That evening, Rachel met David for coffee at the same diner where they'd had their first real conversation. It had become a tradition, meeting here every few months to catch up and discuss her progress. I heard about the fellowship, David said as they slid into their usual booth. Congratulations. Well deserved. I keep thinking about that night at the community center, Rachel said. If you hadn't been so obnoxiously condescending, none of this would have happened. David laughed. I prefer to think of it as motivationally challenging. You were being a snob, Rachel said, but she was smiling. You saw a woman in worn clothes and made assumptions. I did, David admitted. And I've been trying to make up for it ever since. You've taught me something important, Rachel. Talent doesn't always come wrapped in the package we expect. Sometimes it's pushing a cleaning cart. Sometimes it's sitting quietly in the back row. Sometimes it's hiding in plain sight because the world hasn't made room for it yet. Have you changed how you teach? Rachel asked curiously. Completely. I pay more attention now. To the quiet students, the older students, the ones who seem out of place. I ask myself what assumptions I'm making and whether they're fair. You'd be surprised how many talented people I've noticed once I started actually looking. Rachel stirred her coffee. I ran into Lisa from custodial services last week. She asked if I remembered her. I didn't, not really. We must have passed each other in the hallways dozens of times, but I was always so focused on staying invisible that I never really saw her either. What did you tell her? That I did remember and that I missed working with her. Which was only half true. I don't miss the work, but I do miss some of the people. They were kind to me when I needed kindness. Rachel paused. I've been thinking about starting a program for university staff who want to pursue education. A lot of them have dreams they gave up, just like I did. What if we created pathways for them? David's eyes lit up. That's a fantastic idea. I could help you write a proposal for the administration. We could call it the Second Chance Scholars Program or something like that. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Rachel said. I need to survive my first year of graduate school first. But she was already making notes in her notebook, the same worn one she'd carried for 20 years. Now it was full of ideas not just for mathematical problems, but for ways to help others find their way back to education, back to dreams they'd set aside. The first year of graduate school was brutal. Rachel had expected that. What she hadn't expected was how much she'd love it anyway. Yes, there were moments of frustration and exhaustion. Yes, there were younger students who picked up concepts faster because they hadn't been away from formal mathematics for 2 decades. But Rachel had something they didn't: perspective, determination, and a deep appreciation for the opportunities she'd been given. She also had a unique approach to research. While other students followed established methodologies, Rachel brought fresh eyes to old problems. Her years of solitary study had given her an unconventional way of thinking that sometimes led to surprising breakthroughs. By her second year, she was working on a research project that excited her more than anything she'd done before. It involved applications of pure mathematics to real-world problems, finding elegant solutions to questions that had practical implications.